Great. Okay, so let me put up I'm gonna try to share screen again. I had dual monitors plugged in and I think it didn't like that. So let me go backward here. If you haven't heard me say it before, you will hear it. I am convinced that the time from when you say, I'm going to share my screen to when it happens is at least 5 minutes every time.
Carmen, thanks for acknowledging how difficult it is. I appreciate that.
For sure. Okay, so we did our greetings and our chat box introductions. We're going to have a presentation about gathering data from partners around KPI. And again, we've got 2 presenters with us and they remain available after this for follow-up questions. I'm going to go over some mandatory reporting guidelines. And then Dylan and I are going to talk about the regional assessment and give you, for those of you that we haven't chatted with already who aren't in the work group, kind of a little glimpse, like a preview of what that work and that deliverable is going to look like. And we'll also show you the timeline for when additional TA and conversation around that is going to happen. And then after that, I'll give you like a quick update about Early Learning Hub Manager. As you notice, Denise is not here. Her last official day was on Friday. She was really sad. She's promised I can talk to her on the phone every day on her commute if I want to. So I'll keep you updated on how things are going and what podcast she's listening to. Okay, so without further ado, Isabella and Diane, thank you so much for being here. And I'm gonna let you introduce yourselves. I think you probably know most people here, but.
Great, thank you. I'm wondering, I'm going to start trying to share my screen now so that if it doesn't work, it'll only be so much buildup.
Well, that was a very advanced move. I'm going to write that down.
We'll see if it works. All right, can you see my screen? All right, and as you know, when we share screens, we can see very little of the people in the room, so I apologize in advance. So I know many of you, but not all of you. My name is Diane Reed, and I work at Portland State University, and I've been working on the KPI evaluation for 6 years. For the first couple of years, I was like the behind the scenes data wrangler, manager, cleaner of all things, and now the person who does all of that amazing work for us is Isabella, and she's on the call also. And she's going to be doing her best to sort of document the things that come out of our conversation today. And then, of course, Beth is not with us today, but she is in flight to Italy. So we wish her well, but we're going to have to just like forge forth without her. So of course, anything that comes up today, if you have questions, follow up, you're welcome to reach out to me. We're happy to have one-on-one conversations. But the real goal of this time that we have with you is to sort of hold space for some peer learning, which since I've been on the project, every time we talk with Hub folks, it's like, we need time with each other to learn what everybody's doing. So in the January call where we talked about the program survey changes, there was a request for this conversation. So that's really what we're here to support and facilitate and document and move forward. The conversation will probably not end today, but we'll get through some of it. So thanks for having us. My slides they won't move forward. Curses. Let's see. There we go. So we'll just have a really quick orientation because while many of you know stuff about KPI data collection, for some of you, this is maybe the first time you've been invited to that table, or you're just really grateful for your partners who do that work. So we'll do a really quick sort of orientation about KPI data collection, we'll get the conversation flowing with a brainstorm about what makes for useful data and how the KPI data are used. And then really the bulk of our time together will be around this peer learning discussion. All right, so KPI data collection. So broad brushstrokes, just to make sure we're all sort of on the same page. It includes program surveys, which is where the hubs tell us about their strategies. What are you doing? What's the reach? How are you doing it? Really broad brushstrokes. And we talked a lot about that in our call with, in our time with the call in January, so I won't get into it. And then we have the outcome surveys, which is the survey that you give to participants in those program surveys, where we get a sense of what they got from the program, their takeaways, what they appreciated, what they wanted to be done differently. And then historically, we've also spent some of the KPI evaluation dollars on case studies where we look at, innovative practices, something new. We really do a deeper dive into a certain strategy, and then all of the other regions in the state can read those and decide whether they might want to scale up those practices to their work. So hopefully that all sounds familiar. Should we pause there? Are there any quick questions? And just pipe up because I can't see the grid of all of you. So if you raise your hand, I can't see it. So just a quick reflection. Who in the virtual room sort of remembers how the data collection plan came into place? I wasn't there at the beginning, so. All right, so these data components stemmed out of the programming that people were deciding to tackle. So like when KPI rolled out, they were like, what do we need to ask to know if this is working, to be able to course correct? And that's when the outcome surveys came about. Program surveys didn't come out until like 2018, which is when we did a revamp of the outcome surveys where we looked at with the hubs. We looked at all of the measures that we've been looking at for years. We took out the outcomes measures that were like ceilinged out, where it started high, it ended high, we weren't learning anything. We gave the hubs an opportunity to say like, don't take that one out, I need it, I love it. And we really worked through the process to make sure that the current measures we're using are meaningful, that people sort of felt good about it. It was a very iterative, collaborative process. And surveys, it's to offer something that we can use across the state. Like that's really where why we're doing surveys. We can't interview everybody. We can't do deep qualitative work on every program. So it gives us some constant measures across all of the programming to sort of give that bird's eye picture of KPI programming and its impact. Any questions about that? I'm excited to get to the peer learning part, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. And then just take a minute to maybe think about how you feel about your KPI data collection. You don't have to share. And maybe the feeling is, I'm relieved somebody else does it. But just take a minute to think about it. All right, I'm hoping that sort of having that sense of where you're coming to the conversation will help inform how the conversation unfolds. So I have the privilege of meeting with hub folks between 2 and 4 times a year to talk specifically about KPI data collection. So I hear those feelings pretty regularly, whether it's like, we love it, we're doing great, we use it all the time, to KPI data collection, you're calling me about that again. So I appreciate your willingness to come to the conversation. So I'm gonna stop talking and I'm gonna let you guys start getting your conversational hats on. So just let's spend a couple minutes talking about what makes for useful data. And I'm gonna mute so you feel extra. There's no wrong answer.
The chat
got
box
a few.
says accuracy and understanding.
I'll just unmute and speak. I think for us, what makes useful data is one, is it relevant to our goal? And so if it's not something we're working towards, then that data doesn't really, we're not addressing it, and it's not really going to show any change. But then also that change. So having a baseline is helpful long-term, and also just kind of from year to year. So like some of the things that we do, people have been involved in for a long period of time. So we start to see less and less change. So being able to make that comparison too of like, how is the change, and kind of what caveats go along with that? Is there still big growth? If it's not, what are the confounding variables? So understanding the confounding variables, I think, is also important.
Thanks, Erin. That's super helpful.
I think it also.
This is Kelly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Kelly, let's hear from you first, and then Manny can share.
I think I was going to ask, what is this question, what makes for useful data only a question for KPI? Are you asking for just, you're just generally
Just in
speaking? So I
general,
agree.
yeah, it should,
Yep,
yeah. it
yep. Okay. I
Thanks for
agree.
clarifying.
Thank you.
Mhm. Manny?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, with the surveys for the coordinators and the providers who work with families, it really helps guide them to see what are some of the challenges are, the successes are, and what activities may be needed to support the learning and growth for families. And I know that providers see that as very useful. And for them, it's also a tool. They really try to elevate family leadership and voices. And so they always share with families like, this is like, you know, your time, and it's a tool for you to, you know, give your feedback, and, you know, for us to hear from you, your feedback, and that your voice matters. And it's kind of put it that way within these surveys, and it hasn't been a problem. It's been pretty helpful for as a tool for everyone to learn from.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so I've heard a couple of different things. So like, are we getting the information we need, whether it's like family perspectives or on the are we moving the goals we're looking at? Are we asking the right questions? I think one thing that I didn't hear yet is there enough data to tell us the whole story, right? Like if you have a program and there are 50 families in it, you get 2 surveys, it's not going to tell you the whole story. And then is the data accurate? Is it, you know, truthful? Are we getting people to be honest about where they see change and what they felt and what they experienced? Are we creating that sort of safe space? So I think that's a really good foundation to dive into the next portion of our conversation. So how is the KPI data used? How do you guys use it? I know, Manny, you just talked about it a little bit. Maybe, and we can start, I've just put these bullets to sort of get your juices flowing.
Diane, are you able to see the chat at all? Because some of those questions have
No.
already been answered.
I can't see anything except for my presentation thing. So can somebody read off the chat?
I can. I'll read some of them. I'm not sure how many of them are related to this question of the last one. Accuracy, understanding, have a feedback loop to the people supplying the data. Use it for storytelling, feedback and input, needs to be actionable, being able to show the impact in the region, shows what's working, allows our partners to promote the program, justifies future investment, information for statewide systems approach and alignment, data moves a program from pilot phase into full implementation or not. I don't think data can tell the whole story. It has to be qualitative as well as quantitative. one-on-one interviews, for example, are necessary, as well as surveys, and then funding decisions. You're muted, Diane.
Diane, you're still muted. Okay.
In addition to being able to show your screen, being able to speak is also a challenge with Zoom. It's not one, it's the other.
Diane, try pressing Alt-A.
Whoever's hosting the meeting, could you try to unmute her? Like sometimes
Yeah, it lets me ask to unmute or like ask her to unmute, but not unmute her. Let me try again. Oh my gosh. Diane, maybe you could, I wonder if you stopped sharing, if then you could unmute and just stay unmuted.
Okay, I got a notification. Thank you. Goodness. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, Lordy. Thank you for your patience with that. That was
Yeah, of
such an
course.
amazing list to hear read off from the chat. Because I have limited views, I couldn't see any of that. But I'm like, when I hear that list, I'm like, with commitment and thoughts like that, why don't we get more KPI data? Because clearly you understand the usefulness and you know how I really heard that like realize the value of data is felt and you guys use it. You see how it can be important to families, to the system, to your like quality improvement processes. And yet, you know, we have these struggles around getting adequate data around KPI, and we have for years. And of course, COVID adds a whole new challenge to that. But so I loved hearing that. So whoever read that off, thank you. I can't see you in the sea of tiny boxes. I apologize.
Diane, also we can see your home screen as opposed to the presentation. Just wanted you to know.
Oh,
I was already in a meeting today where
Goodness.
someone was sharing their like texts
oh
accidentally instead of the presentation. So just wanted to give you the heads
Hold
up.
And
How
like,
do
I feel like we should give you a shout out for having the tidiest desktop like I've ever seen. Like, I know it's private, but I was just like, don't read the things, but also, wow, so few icons.
I'm wondering, okay, can you see it now?
Now we
All
can
right.
both hear you and see your presentation.
I'm not gonna unmute myself. I'll just try to be really quiet and hope you can't hear the babies screaming in the background.
Oh my gosh.
My goodness, I'm sorry. Thanks for wading through this with me. I have the multiple screen situation also, so it's extra unwieldy. All right, so I would like to move to I would like to take some of that chat energy that you guys are very comfortable with, like putting things in the chat, and bring it to a conversation. Like where we actually talk to each other in the boxes. And I know that can be awkward because sometimes we talk over each other, have to take a second. I'll do my best to help invite, leave space. But what we really want to do is have you guys talk with each other about how you work with KPI partners to get data, sort of the different strategies that you use, whether you're doing in person or virtual programming, whether you do something different with family engagement or kinder transition versus professional development strategies, and then talk about if you have other sort of parallel systems that you use or systems for providing incentives, sort of these things that we hear about making a difference for you guys in your data collection, this is the time for you to talk about those things with each other and share your experiences. And we love to hear, successes. Is not just like these are all the ways that I'm great. Like, tell us about your colossal fails. Like, what we want is to really provide time to have a fruitful conversation about how we do this work and how we can learn from each other. So why don't we tackle the first question first? So how do you work with partners? So a lot of you, your KPI dollars go from you to partners. How do you work with them to get the data that you need?
I'm happy to kick us off and share our process at our hub. And the person who works most closely with KPI in our hub is Elena Barreto. So if there are follow-up questions, I'm going to direct them her way because she's the expert, not me. And I consulted her prior to this to make sure I didn't get anything wrong or missed anything major. So I think the first thing that we do, which is probably common across other hubs, is we create an expectation in our subcontract, or we call it a statement of work, that we're going to be collecting certain data points, and we attach the actual data points and the what is the word I'm looking for, like the template of what we're going to be asking them to complete, as a way to just, be really upfront from the beginning. We're collecting this, and this is what it looks like to collect that information. We also try to reduce barriers of our partners of submitting, particularly the outcome survey of families. Like, we know when we first started collecting this data, we had our school districts who we subcontract with all of our KPI dollars with, we had them submitting the data on their own, like of the outcome surveys to PSU, and it was really unsuccessful, like very unsuccessful. No one really did it consistently. So we started having them send them to us, and we have our staff submit that data. We also started drawing the line pretty hard that we were not paying them until we received that data. And that's probably been the biggest mechanism of like, oh, sorry, we can't pay you. We don't have this information. That has probably been one of the key strategies, in addition to just being like, you just need to send us the outcome surveys, and we will enter the data for you. And we're not paying you until we receive that information. So then there's one other thing I wanted to mention.
Dorothy, can I
Yeah.
ask a quick question there?
Yeah.
Because I think that doing it for compliance, right? Like, we require it. It's in our MOU. We won't pay you until we see it. I think that sometimes the middle folks in between the people completing the survey understand those pieces. But how do you, we don't require that families complete them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little tension there. How do you, and I'm sorry, because I know Elena's not here, and maybe anybody can answer this question, but how do you sort of hold that tension where we don't require participants to complete it, but we do require our partners to collect data?
I mean, I'll answer it, but I think there are going to be other strategies based on how people are using their KPI dollars. Our districts, because we use this for kinder camps and for families engaging in kinder camps, like, they embed it in their process of getting feedback from parents in terms of, at the end of wanting. I have not heard from any of our districts that they struggle with getting parents to complete the survey, because parents in general want to provide the feedback to schools of what their experience has been like. And so that's, the barrier hasn't been that people don't want to complete the survey. The barriers that we've experienced working with getting KPI data, and for us, it's again, the family outcomes survey specifically, has been more barriers of do our school districts in the summer have enough staffing capacity to collect it and submit it? That was always our barrier, and prioritizing that so that they could actually use the information that these parents are so generously giving to us. And so the tension isn't like having parents complete it. It's like we had to use the compliance mechanism then to follow back up with like, you know, over time, having them be able to see that this is like, if we're able to consistently gather the data, then we can actually spit it back out so that you can see what the outcome is and use that information. But we had to do that cycle at least, I don't know, 2 years before our districts started to really comprehend the like, give us the data, we submit the information, we get back to you with like, here are the outcomes that you're seeing. I don't know if that's helpful, but it's like not, it's also not instantaneous. We had to use a hammer a little bit to get the ball rolling before there is the usefulness being seen by some of our partners, and for them to understand that this is also honoring families. And, you know, like if they're taking the time to complete the information, they want you to know what they're completing. So you have to do something. You should be doing something with that.
Thanks, Dorothy.
Um,
Does anybody?
This is Cynthia with the South Central Early Learning Hub. And one of the things that I've done from the very beginning is to talk to people about why the evaluation is important. So I'll talk about how it, you know, we want to know what participants, we want input from participants, and we want to know if we're giving them what they need, if they're actually learning from what we're doing. And then I talk about the state requirements and how they're tied to the money. And then I talk about the data and how the data is probably tied to the legislative process of allocating the funding. And then I talk about the statewide system approach of aligning early learning. And I don't quite tell it like that. That's how I'm saying it to you, but I always do that. And I'm not sure how well that works. But people seem to acknowledge that, or they think about that from a different perspective than this is just a bunch of work that I have to do. It's tied to getting the money to them. But I think the most important one is we want to hear from educators, we want to hear from families. Are we meeting their needs? Are they learning anything? So that's one of the ways we approach it. We also do put it in our agreement that it's a requirement, and I meet with them and I send them ticklers and I walk through the survey with them. That doesn't always work, but in some cases I think it helps, and it helps them connect to what's actually on the evaluation and why it has meaning. I'm looking at my notes. We have, you know, I've had a couple of experiences, one with and it was around kindergarten camps. It's the only time I've had this experience. The person that was responsible for them, coordinating them, absolutely refused to do the surveys. But I didn't know that until the activity was over. So then we talked about whether we were going to give them the money. And because in the agreement, we didn't say money, your funding is contingent upon you producing these conducting the evaluation process. The management decided not to withhold the money. But as a result of that, I'm much more clear with the information I give up front.
So Cynthia, it sounds like you talked a lot about making sure that your partners feel supported and that they understand the value, both in terms of like, you know, that kind of hammer, like it's required if you want the money to do it, but also like the usefulness that how that feedback loop can be used and elevating participant voice, whether they're providers or families. Do you, and this may be too granular, but do you remember the person you were working with who didn't want to do it for kinder camps? Do you remember what their concern was, or was there an effort made to ensure that they understood the usefulness and the value of the data collection process?
You know, I think it was tied to summer activity, early fall activity. And, you know, I just don't think he wanted to do it. I don't know how else I could analyze him, but we had a number of conversations about him, and I just simply think he didn't want to do it. And that maybe it has something to do with staffing issues.
Yeah, there are a lot of very real challenges like time, bandwidth, understanding. But I feel like what I've heard multiple people talk about is really engaging the partner as your partner. Like they need to understand the value and they need to feel supported so that even when it's a rough hill to climb, when they have reasons not to, they want to do it. They understand that they want to hear from the people who are in the class or in the professional development training, that it has some usefulness to them. And that feedback loop, Dorothy, that you were mentioning, that when your partners get used to the feedback loop, they'll rely on it. And especially now when the data, so many of the surveys are going out electronically, they don't get a chance to like flip through and see what people said before they hand them off for data entry. The only way they know is by us providing the data back to them. So super helpful. Those are all really useful ways to get people to be collaborators in getting the data. Manny, or
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just want to share that here in Multnomah County, one strategy that I use to kind of collect and support our providers and even families and getting the data in is I convene a monthly P3 cohort meeting where our different nonprofit agencies who work in all the different sites, P3 sites and school districts come together. And when they come together, it's an opportunity for them to learn from each other, share resources, strategies, approaches, share, challenges and successes. And then part of that cohort meeting is talking about how we're doing. And it's an opportunity for me also to give reminders about data and the ongoing data. And it's opportunity for the providers to really share about the different strategies and how they collect data, because sometimes it could be challenging. And I would have to say that during COVID times was the most challenging, but we were still able to do it. And the way that we approach data here at Early Learning Multnomah is really not that it's a mandate or mandatory thing for families to do, but it's opportunities for families to participate if they really care to or want to really have their voices be heard. And really the providers share it in a way where it's stated that, this is just a tool to help guide us, and how we can support the activities and help you grow in this program. And so the families here in Multnomah County are really used to doing these family survey outcomes, because pre-COVID, these outcomes are actually shared with the families, and the approaches there, the conversations there, and they're very transparent as to why they're doing these surveys. And so they're handed out during times of engagement. So during, playing group sessions, during parent cafes, family engagement events, ongoing parent education support groups. These are the times where our P3 coordinators are like once, every quarterly, have them out in the open, share what it is. Families are welcome to go up and grab them, complete them, and then turn them in. And then the nice part, pre-pandemic, when we had the monthly cohort meeting, they easily they go, here you go, Manny. And so it's like my job, I collect them, I enter all the data. And that's pre-COVID times. But during COVID, we problem solved, came up with creative ways to engage families in completing the data, turning into the virtual world of doing virtual family engagement, play and learn sessions and whatnot. A lot of providers were dropping off home kits and activities. And these were opportunity times to bring the surveys along with them, have them complete them. And a lot of our providers kind of go out of their way and we do wellness checks during COVID time. So even like via phone, those parents who are tech savvy, via email. And then of course our providers, because we're not seeing each other in person, everything was scanned over via email to me or through mail. But convening these monthly cohort meetings really is just a great opportunity to, remind all of KPI, folks that this is ongoing for us and how are we going to support it, and they just kind of come together and find creative ways to get that turned in. So we've been doing okay with that so far.
Annie, I love that you talked about not just, we heard Cynthia and other people talk about closing that data loop, that feedback loop with partners or program implementers, but I love the idea of closing the feedback loop with participants so that they can see how the information they provided is what it's telling, what part of the story it's telling, and how it's being used. Because I think even if you preface the ask of like, can I have 5 minutes of your time to complete the survey? We promise we'll use it. But seeing that feedback loop of like, oh, these were changes that were made, or here's the summary of the, impact of this session on whomever, XYZ. I think that's a really, it's like one step further than I think most people take it. It's really important. And every time that feedback loop is closed and followed up upon, then there's more faith that the next time you're going to give your time to share your perspective, that it's going to be used and that there's going to be value in it. So like you start to build goodwill, right? I mean, I'll fill out any survey that comes across me because I am who I am, but like not everybody wants that. So it's a great practice. I love that you shared that. And Carmen, I just want to check on time because I feel like we're running out of it.
I think you're good with like, I don't know, 5 or 10 more minutes.
Okay, great. So I didn't hear a lot of people sort of slicing and dicing their strategies by, virtual versus in person, although Manny, you touched on that a little bit, how it can be easier in person. But something to think about. And then one other thing that we didn't hear covered today, but I know people have talked about, are parallel systems for tracking participant information and in providing incentives. So we probably won't have time to like crowdsource that idea, but just planting the seed of like, if you're feeling resistance or barriers, think about those things that you can knit into your data collection that will sort of add an extra carrot, right? So incentives are something that we've heard a lot about recently in our check-in calls. And just know that we're here to partner with you to help you figure out a way to do it. Because it can be like a little added administrative burden on the front end, but it can be really helpful for people to participate. So I just want to do a really quick recap of, I'm going to share my screen again and hope it works. Okay, can you see that? All right, so here are some things that we heard. So strategies to engage partners to embed the requirements in the MOU, right? I think a lot of people do that. I think where it gets a little bit hairier is to provide the training and support to ensure proper administration and to really make sure that those partners understand the value and why they're doing it and how the information is used, like locally as their feedback loop for like ongoing programmatic improvements, regionally, so that you guys can make informed decisions about what strategies you're funding at the statewide level to ensure the funding's still there, yes, but also to know, what strategies do we want to look at scaling across regions, informing standards, like things that we now think of as sort of rote, like we just know that we think that the things should be offered in a series. We didn't know that before we started measuring this work, right? There, you can look at developing an activity registration system. Again, ensuring that the value is understood. It's easier to bring people on board, participants and partners, when they really understand the value of what we're doing and closing that data loop to reinforce the value. So we are working on a training video for you guys to offer to your partners. We have it scripted. We're going to share it out with you all to get some feedback. So we make sure we're covering sort of the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So that can be one more tool in your toolbox when you're getting these partners on board. I have the question, what else do you need? But I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer that question right now. But just if you think of something you need, don't hesitate to email or call and tell us. I know we're running out of time. So strategies to engage participants, which is a different, that other layer to, again, ensure that the value is understood. Administering it during the event, whether it's online or in person. If you have a low response rate because you're emailing the link after the fact, save 5 minutes, 10 minutes during the session to administer the survey then, because then you have the opportunity to support participation. If families have questions, like what's being asked of me, I don't understand this, do I have to answer this? They can ask a person live, right? Instead of just being like, this is confusing, and close it. And then we get the, survey in progress with a lot of empty spots. You can incentivize participation, and then you can close the data loop with participants. All right. Stop share. So we're running out of time. So I am trying to, practice what we preach. We did put together a survey, very quick. 2-minute survey for you guys to do live. So I'm just going to share the link in the chat, which now I can see. It's only a couple questions. And I promise you, I appreciate your honesty, and we will use the information. So while people take a couple of minutes to fill that out, are there any questions you want to throw out to the whole group? I know we have just a couple minutes. We never have the time to go as deeply as we want to. And with so many people and voices and experiences in the room, I feel like we could have used 2 hours, but I'm so appreciative for the stories we heard.
I just want to upvote the technique of telling people directly in the experience how evaluations in the past have been used, because I had a lot of experience with that as a trainer, and a lot of success with that. Is like at the bottom of like the eval, there's even a space that said like, what are other opportunities you'd like? And I would tell people like, next week, like we're doing a training on this, because so many people requested it at the bottom of this eval in the past. And people, like, when I would see that, would like meticulously fill in the last blurb on those. It's like a stark difference to when you didn't say that.
Right? This conversation is from our call in January. And in that survey, you'll have an opportunity to tell the Early Learning Division and PSU what else you want more of, need more of. And we love knowing how to support you all in this work. And the only way we can know that is if you tell us. So. All right. Carmen, are you ready to take the reins back from us?
Yeah. Thank you for being here, Diane and Isabella. We appreciate everything you do and your leadership on this, and look forward to seeing the training video too.
Yeah, and we'll share out our notes from this conversation and our slides and everything, so that, we had to skip over things pretty quickly. So, all right, thanks all.
Okay. We are going to change gears. We're going to thanks everyone for your input on that. We can pull together a really nice synopsis of some things that have worked for us, both in terms of TA and TA and how to do TA and support. So we're going to switch gears into some mandatory reporting guidelines, and this came out of, so we noticed in the last I guess in the last year, as hubs are having more and more conversation with childcare providers and more conversation with families while doing coordinated enrollment, that there was really an uptick of families coming to the hubs and especially coordinated enrollment staff with allegations of child abuse and neglect that they had either heard from someone else or that they themselves had a concern that abuse or neglect was happening at a childcare site. And we have other partners that we work with who've kind of had mandatory reporting and how to report suspected abuse and neglect, have had more like direct guidance from us on that in the past, like a CCR&R, because they were doing referrals to childcare. So kind of the more interfacing that you're having in parents in that particular kind of conversation about childcare, you end up being the one receiving that. And it was brought to our attention by you all that we really needed to have a clear set of guidance on what it is to do with that, rather than sort of a one-off call to Anne, who is awesome and very responsive and very thorough, but that isn't really a sufficient process. So what I did, and I attached it in the agenda, we worked with ODHS, and we went through and we wrote up a specific set of guidance for early learning hubs. Now, let me see. I'm going to do the share. I should have started early like Diane did. Okay. So within statute, after conversation with ODHS, we did confirm that early learning hub staff would be considered mandatory reporters of suspected child abuse and neglect. And the statute is there. In the guidance doc that I sent out, there's a link to that statute if you want to see it more closely.
Hey, Carmen.
Carmen.
Yeah.
If you're meaning to share, it's not
It's not sharing? Okay,
Yeah.
let me do it one more time. All right, can do this. Thank you. How about now?
You're good.
Thank you, Dylan. Okay. We did that. Okay, going backward. So I worked with ODHS and did confirm that under statute, all of your staff would be considered mandatory reporters, which means that they would need to report any of their own suspicion of neglect or abuse immediately, or anything that's reported to them. So that includes, as it says here, suspicions of or allegations of abuse and neglect that are brought to them by community members. What we've heard so far, at least in my time here, has been mostly parents coming from a publicly funded program, coming back to the hub and saying, I actually have a problem with what's happening or something that I think might be happening. So we wanted to make sure that we have outlined for you really clear steps to take. And before I'm operating under the understanding that everyone here has been working in roles in early childhood where they are familiar with mandatory reporting. So I'm not going to dive super deeply into that. At the end of this, there are several links to additional training on mandatory reporting. So if you need a more like in-depth into what does that fully require and like what's something to look for in terms of neglect or abuse, or you want additional support on that, there are links at the end of this on how to find training like that through DHS, and also how you can find it again at no cost, actually on the OCCD website. So that caveat, I'm going to go through this not as if I'm doing like a full training on how we do mandatory reporting. I'm just going to give you the guidelines that we have for Early Learning Hub specifically and answer any questions about that. Another caveat I'll give you is that some of you probably already have a process that from your backbone, or maybe just within your general office, of how you handle this. You can continue following that as long as the steps in here are also completed. I'm going to go ahead. I can't see you all. I can only see a few people. So please just unmute if you have a question, or raise your hand, because that flags you to the top and I can see you. Renee.
Hey there, thanks for this. Yeah, my team is very familiar with their role as mandatory reporters. And I think this document is good, but I think I would like to have some more in terms of how ELD programs are going to handle it. And so we have an issue in play right now, like today, with a preschool promise program. We've heard from the provider that this provider cannot be around children. She's the contract holder with ELD. No one has reached out to coordinated enrollment staff or our CCR&R staff. Both of those teams have reached out to different ELD licensing compliance, coordinated enrollment leadership to say, what are we doing? We have families calling us. And so I think that a continuation of this document here of who is responsible for what and the flow that we can expect, so we don't, I mean, families are in distress and we have zero information to give them. And it's like, critical hair on fire moment. And I'm sure there is a sense of urgency behind the scenes, but we are not getting that communication from any folks that we've reached out to at ELD. And we need answers right now. So I'm using an in play thing, but I think going forward, having something in place so that we know exactly what the chain of command is, what information we can and should have, and who we can and should share it with is super critical. Not just what does it mean to be a mandatory reporter, but how does this system work with itself to make sure that all players know what's going on and know what their role is.
You're saying that the provider has told you that they are suspended?
So the provider reached out with a letter to Dana, to CCR&R, and to my coordinated enrollment person, explaining kind of a little loosey-goosey on what happened. Since then, we have tried to reach out to licensing, to Dana, to try to get all of that detail so that we know what to do. Because we have families who the program is closed. The provider is saying, I'm not open today. We need an answer. So I know that's not the conversation for this meeting right now, but I use that example because it's what's happening right now. So I would love to talk to whoever would like to talk to me later about this.
Okay.
Gotcha, Renee.
And Renee, I would underscore, we've had very similar things here in Marion and Polk, couple of different ones that I could point to, and that there's some love in the chat around this. I think from a systems point of view, making sure that the hub is included where it needs to be included so that we can be that resource for families is critical.
For sure. And we did some work earlier in the year, or I guess last year now, where it was flagged for us that hubs were not all that hubs were not consistently being informed when a program was closed due to a suspended license or a revoked license. And this sounds slightly different, but is also troubling. You need to know that. I agree. Like parent, you need to know as quickly as possible so that you can assist parents in finding other care, or at least know at the beginning what they're saying, what they're referring to when they call you. So thank you for highlighting that. That's definitely troubling. It sounds like Anne is going to reach out to Renee, and we'll talk internally about that too.
Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, Anne.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna go through this, and if there are things on here that anyone has questions about or need to be clarified, let me know. Again, I am hopefully under a safe assumption that most of this is not new.
Can we go back to this for
Yes.
just, yeah. I actually have some concerns about the way this is worded. Obviously, I'm pretty familiar with the mandatory reporter side of this, but this says inform the family, and I know it's written from the perspective that the family is telling you something's wrong in a program, but there are circumstances in which the program might be telling you something about what's going on with the family or other things, and in that case, you do not inform a family if you are calling to make a report about them.
That is a really good point. And this is part of why I wanted to walk through it all with you, because you're going to see it from a different lens. Okay, so we can change that to like inform the person reporting to you or that you're speaking to. Also making sure that we give that person the hotline number so they can call as well. I'm not going to read through all this information. This is straight from the DHS guidance of what information you're going to gather. This is on there, especially there's some detail on this guidance because we know from both what practice has told us and from our own experiences internally that when you get a report like this, it's pretty like, it can really make it, you can be easily flustered during it. So having some detail in there to say like, hey, remember to ask the person who's talking to you about these different things that you're going to be asked in your report. Okay, so you're going to call, you're going to be prepared to share the information. This links to more information on what happens when you make the call, like the sort of content of the call. Taking care of yourself, again, this can be traumatic to hear and to share and like have to repeat to someone else. So as a supervisor, I always recommend to people like, hey, like if you want someone else to sit with you while you make the call, I can do that. Like plan to like take a walk around the block afterward, because sometimes people don't even recognize like how stressful it was to them. And obviously different people handle it differently. Yeah, Brenda, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, sorry. I would advocate, having been a former Department of Human Services child welfare employee in recovery, I would suggest that it would be important for us to encourage people who have firsthand information to make the call themselves. We really aren't the repository for the abuse claim. So I think it's important to be clear about that.
So let me go backward. So your suggestion is to change, maybe like change this wording of like provide the person you're speaking to at the hotline number so they can make a report if they so choose to, but like provide them with the number and encourage them.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, because a third party report is sometimes often not the most helpful. It's the people that are closest have observed, and we can muddle things if we're sharing information third hand that's either incomplete or one side of the story, and we aren't necessarily trained to do the investigation into that a child welfare person would be. So I just would encourage wording that a little bit differently.
Okay, I've got that noted. Thank you, Brenda. And you did just kind of start to touch on this too. So we're not the investigators, and we're gonna make sure that we're protecting any investigation that happens by keeping all information confidential. So we're not sharing information with the person who's alleged to have done something. We're also not sharing with other community partners. Sometimes there is an instinct to want to like alert everyone who might be involved that an allegation was made. This is problematic for multiple reasons. One being that it can severely interrupt an investigation if everyone knows what's happening and is making up stories about it, and even like kind of like trying to like get their story straight. The other thing is that an allegation can be made falsely, and that there is a due process for investigating that. So, if you've ever something that I learned from licensing that is really, and from CCRNRs that is unfortunate, is that there are false claims made against providers sometimes in a retaliatory way. And a way that sometimes will happen, which wouldn't happen in preschool promise, but something around like payment or like a disagreement, that there are occasions when it has been found that parents made an allegation as a way to sort of like get back at a provider. And if the allegation against that provider has already been shared widely, then how does everyone get back to all the people that have shared the allegation with to be like, oh no, they were cleared? So we want to be really careful and protective and not interrupt the process that is due to people. Renee.
I'm wondering if there could be explicit definition of what confidentiality means specifically for preschool promise in terms of coordinated enrollment staff, CCR staff, and licensing staff. Because I think that still, I feel like it's very clunky, and the partners themselves don't necessarily know when it's considered a community partner and when it is actually, and in our case that we're dealing with now, the provider did copy all partners. And so we didn't have that question, but that isn't usually the case.
Okay, gonna add some clarity there. That's a good flag. Okay. And it needs to be clear to staff that we're not investigating the situation further. Again, that moves into the work that is done by Department of Human Services and Child Welfare, who are trained to do so, as opposed to other concerned parties. And then just important to remember that even if it was unfounded, it's still appropriate to make the report, right? We never know what's going to happen, and it isn't up to us to decide if something hits the bar of, or if it's believable, or if it could have been a misunderstanding, like those things, which to me, I'm like, well, luckily, because I'm not trained in that, but it is up to people who are trained in that to figure it out. So if you're hearing an allegation of abuse or neglect, or you've reason to believe that it's happening, then you make that report. Renee.
And sometimes it's not that it's just founded or unfounded. Sometimes it's unable to determine. And so I think that maybe adding, if the conclusion was unable to determine or unfounded, it was still appropriate to make the report, because there's such a hesitation to make that report, wondering, I could be wrong, what happens if I'm wrong? So.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And we never know, because sometimes there might be a couple of things that you call and nothing happens because it doesn't really seem like it was that much, but then there's another call and it's like, okay, now we've hit this does seem like something we need to look into. So. Okay, now we're getting a little bit more preschool promise specific. So If a family comes to you, and this has happened a couple times now, and they're involved in this, so we're going to work with them to figure out what they want to do regarding placement. Do they want to transfer? Is there another program that they would like to be referred to? And then here's one that is a little tricky for us and doesn't sit quite right with everyone as far as what I've heard in the last couple of weeks. But if the complaint was made against a preschool promise program, the expectation is that you would continue to enroll children into those vacancies and make this report. Often Office of Child Care allows providers to operate while under an investigation because the allegation alone is not sufficient to suspend a license and for Preschool Promise to suspend enrollment. The Preschool Promise staff will get back to you will come to you if you need to pause enrollment after the situation has been assessed. And jump in if there's anything that you want to add about these too. So again, just reiterating, if your backbone agency has its own process, like Renee was talking about, again, you can go through that process, but please just crosswalk these, I guess, and make sure that you're hitting all of the marks that are also outlined in this guidance. And then there's resources here. These are also included on the document that I sent out with the agenda. With the exception, I can reply all with the link to the OCCD training, the ARCAN. This is the same one that providers take. So it's a good training. It's about 2 hours. You could take it online. You could also take it in person once, if you're somewhere where we're doing them in person or once we go back to doing that. And then there are a lot of resources on the ODHS website. That was really helpful for me, for us to go through and get your comments and have some other perspective on it. I will revise the document that was sent out and send it back to you. So please treat that one as a draft and don't print it out or send it on to people. Print it out. Are people printing things out? Maybe. Don't forward it on at this point, and I will send you an updated version. It's going to take me a minute because I'm going to have to send it back through ODHS to check on my edits before sending it out to you because I want to make sure it's still in line with what they recommend. Renee, sorry, I missed if your hand is just still up or if you have another.
No, it's a new one. I should have just kept it up the whole time.
You can just stay unmuted with me on this one. I appreciate it. I'm not trying to give you a hard time.
Sure. The only other thing I would say is it might be worth noting that with the new set, it's not new anymore, but with the centralized reporting structure, that the wait time can be a couple of hours. And so I don't think that most people are prepared for that, especially for those that are maybe not accustomed to needing to make those calls and knowing that structure. So I think putting that in the beginning as a, plan your call, you need to call right away, but you also need to have time to call, right? So if it's at the end of the day and you're trying to make your kids dinner, that might not be the right time to try to make that phone call. So I'm not sure how that language should be structured, but it definitely is not going to be a quick process in getting to talk to a human.
Okay, thank you. I was unaware of that. It's been a few times since I've made that call and I had not heard that back. Okay.
And they haven't, at this point, they haven't done what some other folks do, which is like, if you would like to keep your place in line, push 1 and you can hang up. That is not yet an option, but I'm hoping it would be, because that would be really much more helpful than just hanging on the line for 2 hours. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Got you. Okay. Whew. Okay, Okay, thank you for everyone's input on that. Again, that's really helpful to have your perspective. And of course, we will come back to you with more information about the process that Renee, you asked for right at the top of this conversation about getting that communication lines straightened out when providers are closed. It sounds like we have some really important work to keep doing on that. So we'll get back to you on that. Okay, so there's a lot of talking for me in one meeting. We're gonna switch gears again. We've only got, we're gonna have to shorten this last little bit. We're gonna try to get through it in about 8 minutes. Dylan, how fast do you talk? Cool. So we're gonna give you a little highlight, like some highlights of what's coming with the regional assessment plan. We have a work group going. We've got like 5 directors and EOD staff, and Erin Watson, Heidi McGowan has joined this project too. I think most of you know Heidi, she's amazing. So she'll be working, we've got some hours contracted with her that she'll be able to do individual TA with you, as well as do some whole group activity around regional assessment. We wanted to make sure that we got some information out to you. I know having a new deliverable and not having information about it doesn't feel great. So we're gonna give you some information. We're not gonna dive all the way in because we could talk about this for hours. So we're not intending to be cryptic about anything that we say, but know that there's gonna be additional information. We have at least 2 upcoming trainings that we're going to get on the calendar with you to go on this in depth. So,
Carmen,
yes.
Sorry, real quick. I saw that Dorothy had a question about the Head Start and CCR and our directors coming to the meeting. So maybe we could just.
Yeah, you want to jump to that?
Um,
Jump to the timeline first? No. So I'll just answer the question. Dorothy, we have not invited to them the overview and training in April because we realized that we wanted to do an overview and training just with all the hub directors first. So we're confirming a later date in May to have OPK and CCRNR directors join you for a training. And we're going to send out that date probably next week or so.
Because I could have swore that in initial communication, there was encouragement to bring someone from governance or sector plan, and both of those individuals are on those bodies. So when I extended that invitation, our Head Start director said she did want to participate. So I've got to now, and I already have a tense relationship with my Head Start director. So
we're gonna send out the communication from us to OPK directors and CCR directors and say.
So do you not just want, do you want no one other than hub directors then at those trainings in April? Is that the plan now? Okay.
And we will send out the email that says, we have previously asked you in a survey which of these dates in April you could do. We're gonna push that conversation to May. Here's the date, here's who's invited, etc. We got a little excited. Sorry about that.
Totally understand. Just puts me in an awkward space because I've already extended the invite to folks. So
I'm sorry. We'll try to take the blame for it. Or we'll make Lindsay take the blame for it. She's not here. She can't defend herself. No, I would never do that to Lindsay. Okay. Hub directors only. Can you bring key staff who are involved in this piece of the work? Yes. Okay, sorry, I'm just laughing that we have so much to share and so little time to do it. Sorry, I'm getting to my other PowerPoint. Okay, I have a what is the regional assessment slide for you, and I have a what is it not. This first one is what is it? So this is going to be a process, a community-wide process to understand the extent to which conditions are in place in your area with your programs, your organizations, all your early learning systems within your communities to support the goals that we have in Raise Up Oregon. And the process is going to be really centered around our objectives within Raise Up Oregon. A few things that it's not, and when we say assessment, we don't mean a monitoring activity or an evaluation. So we're not evaluating a performance and we're not monitoring. It's also not a repeat of data gathering that's centered on areas where you already have lots of community data. Molly, I'm never going to stop talking about your binders on your shelves that have all your studies and reports that don't always get operationalized, that you've shared where you're like, stop making us do these plans and reports that don't go somewhere. This process is designed to go somewhere. And part of what is going to make it unique is that, like I just said, we're going to be focused on Raise Up Oregon objectives. You in your region are going to choose which of those objectives it is that you're going to focus on. So if you've already got a whole bunch of data and a really great understanding of the lay of the land on an objective, and you don't need to work on that one right now, you're not going to work on it because this isn't a full assessment of everything that's early learning related in your hub. This assessment is really going to focus in on just 3 to 5 objectives that your community wants to focus on right now. That's decided by you. So you will not be asked to pick and do the same data gathering that you've done in the past. We want this to be a meaningful community-wide assessment that has meaningful feedback cycles in it, that brings new things to light and operationalizes the data that you gather as you go. Okay. Dylan, do you want to jump in for a few minutes and maybe then for like a couple minutes and then just go to the timeline? And then you and I will figure out how to share a little bit more about this without going over time.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Could you just click through and just put all 3 of those steps on there? And then maybe one more time, I think, to get the extra little, there we go. So obviously we're going through this super quickly just to give you a little taste for what the regional assessment is going to look like. And the external consultant, Aaron Watson, who's developing all the tools and all the processes that are going to go along with this regional assessment, will be able to give you much, much more detail at those trainings that Carmen was mentioning are going to be happening in April and May. But to give you just the kind of really high level overview, there's going to be 3 major steps. The first is going to be kind of determining what you need to learn about the early care and education system in your region. So that's going to be the phase where you're going to be considering what are the Raise Up Oregon objectives that your region is prioritizing. What are the objectives that you're really going to be working forward to in the future, and would really like to dig deep into. And like Carmen mentioned, that's going to be pretty flexible. It's not going to be that you have to choose all 14. It's not going to be that you have to do them all at once either. They can be kind of approached in a sequential fashion, but you'll just kind of identify which ones you want to focus on. And then the second step is going to be gathering the information. So you're going to kind of identify in the first step what you need to learn about what's going on in your region, what are the kind of barriers to meeting those Raise Up Oregon objectives. And then that second step, you're going to gather the information that you need to kind of begin to address that. And so one of the biggest goals for this is to make sure that there's kind of engagement of many different diverse perspectives. So like it says over there on the side, families are going to be engaged, families and providers are going to be engaged kind of throughout the process. So the goal here is that you're going to be really, rather than just saying, here's a Raise Up Oregon goal, what do we do about it? The goal is to say, here's a Raise Up Oregon goal. Let's talk to the community about what barriers might be facing in achieving that goal. What are some strategies that the community as a whole has as suggestions for how to approach that goal, and other information like that, that'll be through this kind of data gathering process. And then the very last step will be kind of the sense making step, where you're taking all this information that's been gathered. Some of the information has been gathered in kind of informal ways, some of it's been gathered in more formal ways, some of it's gathered in ways you already are collecting data, some of them are new ways of collecting data. And then kind of taking all that information and basically turning it into something that's meaningful in a way that will allow you to kind of develop strategies and take action that are, really informed by this community perspective.
Hey, in our last minute, really quickly, there's just a couple questions or an echoed question in the chat, how this lines up with work plans, if we can make a plan to address that.
So I can kind of quickly address that. The goal is that the work plans, you've kind of started to identify some of the objectives that your region is interested in looking at. You've started to address some of the ways you might be able to measure progress towards those objectives. So that was the kind of first baby step towards the regional assessment, where you'll be kind of homing in on some of those same objectives and utilizing some of those same data sources that you've identified in the work plan. There's no direct link where you have to, if you've said something in a work plan that you're going to measure, you have to attack it in the regional assessment. But the idea was to kind of get things started as you're thinking towards that. Carmen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, thank you, Dylan. I appreciate that. We might need to make it like a video to walk people through this little part first. But I know we're running over a minute, but I want to make sure that everyone sees this timeline and I can send that out. We've got our work group meeting. We've got at least one more meeting, maybe two. We're going to send out this April invite for training with you. We're going to have office hours available with Heidi McGowan and Erin Watson ongoing from April on through the end of the deliverable, through the end of the biennium. We'll do another training to go through a toolkit that we're creating for you to use when you're working with your community. We'll get time with OPK and CCR&R directors to be your partners in this. And then we'll get work going on it, and we will be available, as well as Heidi and Erin, to do presentations with you and support you as you're rolling this out and doing this work in community. So as I was saying at the beginning of the meeting, there's a lot of support to go with this work that's happening. And we are going to be really flexible about how it is that you focus in, what you choose to focus on. It's going to look really different in different hubs. What you create, how you create it is going to look different. How much TA and who you want that to come from is going to look different. So there's going to be a bunch of flexibility in here, but I think we're going to end up with a really great process. And it's going to, this is a thing that I know that you've done very similar things to, and we're just going to be honing in and kind of synthesizing some of the work that's been happening into a little bit different process. So with that, thank you for bearing with us over time. I hate going over time and I apologize. But I will get this in some of these slides out to you, and we will make sure that this timeline gets out, and we'll get invitations out for you to share with governance and get CCRs and OPKs on the same page with us too. And I'm going to let everyone go. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. Take good care of yourselves, okay? We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.